Of course, we do know, and we often talk about the events of the 1980s and the 1990s in the Punjab. And during that dreadful period, there were hundreds of thousands of young Sikh men were murdered, were extrajudicially killed. And the guilty, many of the guilty during that period still remain free. And we do often proselytise, there's a big word, we do often lecture from our pulpit here on Satellite TV News that we must never forget those events. And it's very easy for the young generation to forget, to not even know about these events. And they just want to move on, they want to just get on with life and let's forgive and forget. Is quite often the case. And certainly it's in the Indian state's interest for that to happen. The Indian state certainly want to move on and forget about those events of the 1980s and 1990s. But those events must not be forgotten for very good reason. And just to use an old quote that's often quoted in situations, is if you don't learn from the past, then you are doomed to repeat it. And those events that happened in 1980 must never be forgotten. The generations that experienced that in the 80s and 90s in the Sikh community must certainly pass those experiences, those memories, those horrific memories from that time down to the younger generation so the younger generation can understand, firstly, what the Indian state is and was capable of, secondly, that it could still happen again quite easily if you let it happen, and thirdly, that the guilty must still be held to account. And there's actually a very interesting comment, which we'll cover later on in the comments, which refers to that very thing, this act of never forgetting and holding those to account. So with all that in mind, I'm going to jump back to the 39th anniversary. 39 years ago yesterday was the anniversary of another one of just so many extrajudicial killings. There were 4 young Sikh men were murdered by police in 1986. This occurred. And I'm just going to run through what happened in that day in 1986, just as a gentle reminder, in fact it's not so gentle, as a brutal reminder really, of what the Indian state was up to in that time. Again, just to remind, particularly for our younger viewers and those who weren't alive in these times, this is what happened in the 1980s. This is what went on. This is what was allowed to happen by the Indian government. And those that perpetrated this are still alive, many of them, and are still running free. Does that sound to you like something that should occur?